Jazzcast Pros.
Sleep is a time of repair, recovery, growth, and learning. It's when our body goes to work assessing the damage that's been done and trying to restore your body so that it's in a better place to take on the next day's challenge. Steve Magnus, performance coach and author of Do Hard Things. Hello, my dreamers. Welcome back to another episode of the Doze Podcast, where we dive deep into the transformative power of sleep. I'm your host, Soda Kachkowski, and today, as we wrap up Better Sleep Month, we're exploring the critical link between sleep, performance, and recovery, and I'm joined by a leading educator in the field, Brendan Duffy, who's focused on helping athletes sleep their best. He shares his invaluable insights on how athletes can leverage sleep for optimal performance and swift recovery, and the success that he's seen. We also dive into the broader implications of sleep on mental and physical health, drawing from his extensive experience and recent projects. Now, I want to start off by saying you don't have to be a full-time fitness fanatic or NBA hopeful to benefit from this episode, because sleep is the ultimate performance enhancer for anyone interested in maximizing their potential. Because when you're well rested, your body can recover more efficiently, leading not only to enhanced performance, but to improve reaction times physically and mentally. Additionally, adequate sleep can help reduce inflammation, the last of our hidden sleep disruptors in our series. Now, it's important to know that inflammation plays a significant role in your physical health and performance, impacting both your short-term capabilities and long-term well-being. So some signs of inflammation to look for include things like persistent fatigue. This not only diminishes your energy levels, but can also impair cognitive function and physical stamina, reducing your overall performance in daily activities and sports. Muscle or joint pain, or even morning stiffness. Such symptoms like this can drastically affect your ability to perform physical tasks effectively. And pain and stiffness limit mobility and flexibility, which is crucial for peak athletic performance and day-to-day functioning. Redness and swelling. These signs typically indicate an acute inflammatory response to injury. While inflammation is part of the healing process, excessive or prolonged inflammation can slow down recovery, keeping athletes and active individuals from returning to their peak condition. Gastrointestinal issues. Inflammation in the digestive tract can lead to discomfort, nutrition absorption issues, and general health problems, which in turn can affect energy levels, weight management, and overall physical health. And for athletes, this can mean reduced performance and delayed recovery times. And last, frequent illness. If the immune system is compromised and inflamed, this can lead to increased susceptibility to infections, which can interrupt training and competition and reduce overall physical performance. Managing inflammation effectively is therefore crucial for maintaining peak physical health and ensuring optimal performance, whether in sports, daily activities, or at work. Adequate rest, proper nutrition, and appropriate medical care are key to controlling inflammation and supporting the body's recovery process. So to lead the discussion on the importance of sleep, rest, and recovery, I'm joined today by special guest Brendan Duffy, whose focus is on sports and fatigue management. He's a registered sleep technologist and certified clinical sleep educator with over 25 years of experience in clinical sleep medicine. He currently serves as a director for Catholic Health Sleep Services, managing sleep centers across Long Island, New York. He has spoken and authored articles nationally on the impact of sleep on athletic competition and preparation. And in his words, sleep is often the overlooked area that could determine if your team wins, loses, if players get injured, or how well prepared your players are. He is passionate in his mission, deeply involved in the sports world, working with NCAA teams and elite athletes to enhance their performance through better sleep strategies. He's part of a national initiative called Sleep to Rise with the NCAA Sunbelt Conference and Dr. Shane Creato that focuses on the impact of sleep on mental health and athletic performance. So hello, Brendan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am a big fan of your work. I've followed you for some time, and I love the space that you're in because being someone who's so passionate about sleep, I see all of these gaps in the market. And I know that you kind of got your start as a sleep technologist and you oversee various sleep testing facilities, but your focus is really on sleep performance and recovery. So could you share a little bit about how you actually got into that niche and the work that you're doing?
Sure, and it all goes back to being a sleep tech. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you audio wise because I've been watching what you're doing too, and you're doing great stuff out there.
Thank
Um,
you.
so you're welcome. Basically, I started as a sleep tech in Stony Brook University, and being a sleep tech, it leaves you a lot of time to think because people are sleeping and you're thinking. And if you're passionate like you are about sleep, I call it passionation. You have to have passion, imagination, and a little creativity to make it all work. And when you're interested in something, you start, especially in these morning hours, start to think about different things. I was a travel coach for baseball and roller hockey. While I was a sleep tech, my son was a baseball player and a hockey player. So, like many other dads and moms, I decided I think I'll go coach. I went out and started coaching. And then I started thinking a little bit about I was also looking at school start times. So it kind of all came about at the same time that I thought the school start times, and I know you do a lot of work in the schools with education in schools, which is much needed. But I kind of looked at both of them and looked what I was doing with the coaching and said, we keep talking about overuse and over injury, but how about what if it's not an overuse injury for pitchers, but what if it's underslept? Because a lot of that repair happens. So they didn't have that kind of knowledge that I did. And I early on said, I would like to do something in sleep, but I also want to take my other passion and kind of make a nice sandwich out of it, a nice Oreo with everything I like in one shot. So I said, there is room for sports and sleep information out there. There is a vacuum. And at that time, I think back in 2005, when I go to the sleep conference, I'm actually doing a talk on this. And I think in 2005, I don't want to blow my own horn, but I will a little bit. Back in 2005, I think we had the first article in A to Z talking about sleep and its possible impact on sports performance. And a lot of the things that I mentioned in that article, a couple of years later, Sherry Ma from Stanford took it a step forward by accident. She was actually doing an experiment in the lab where people were volunteering, and she wanted them to extend their sleep to see cognitively if they would have a cognitive improvement. But what happened is a lot of times these college athletes, they're not allowed to have jobs. So she started getting all these college athletes to jump on this research because she was paying them $50 or something. And I think the first group was swimmers, and they came back and they were all smiles. And she was asking them, what's going on? And they said, since they started this experiment for cognitive improvement, their swimming has improved and they're breaking records. And she turned her whole life around and became known as big sports performance information as far as how sleep impacted sports performance. And it was an accident, it really was going the other way. So, one of the messages I got from that is you really don't know where things are going to lead. And that's what this has become. So I'm on a long winded way to get back to your answer. But so I did that. And then I started saying the way that I have to do this, if you're going to be good at something, you have to get your education first. And I started looking as much as I could about hers was, I think, in 2008, stuff that was coming out from Sherry Ma and some of the other folks that were starting to look at that. After that, she did another one with basketball, which was highly promoted, where Stanford players, if they slept, sometimes people misquote it and they'll say if they slept 10 hours, they really didn't sleep 10 hours. They were given a 10-hour window opportunity. They slept about 8.5. They also cut out their caffeine and alcohol, and they improved their game 9%, for foul shots and free throws. Important stats. I mean, there's not much in a gym that's going to improve your game 9%. And people are always looking for a quick fix, and it may be, as easy as their sleep. So I started doing that, and then I got an opportunity from posting a lot of the information I was getting. I have a nice full-time job. I'm very happy here at the hospital. So I was just posting information for people. And it was funny because I would go on LinkedIn, and I think I have 13,000 connections now, but I would just look for trainers and sleep people. And some of them were suspicious. What are you trying to sell me? And I would say, I'm not
Yes.
trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to educate you. I'm just putting information out there for you because I want you to know this is something that's so important for athletes, performance, mental health, and other conditions.
Not to cut you off there, but I was going to say innately, you would think that people would know that sleep would affect reaction time and performance. But sleep is, I always say it's in infancy, right? Like it's the newest of all the health sectors. You know, we only had our first sleep lab in the 1960s. We're starting to study it and understand it more. And you would think that people would just, like I said, innately understand that. But now that the science is there to support it, and of course it affects the bottom line for a lot of these professional teams, right? So of course it has the interest now where if you can shave off, like if you can improve your free throw rate, right? Or run that much faster by seconds, you can set a record. So it's in those little moments, right, that they're recognizing that sleep is the ultimate performance enhancer. And your work, you're going around and you're talking about that. I read a little bit about your Sleep to Rise, the Sunbelt conference. When did that get started and what kind of work do you do in that space?
Actually, what happens is a small world. It's kind of like the sleep world. Once you do something with somebody, I was working with George Washington University. They actually asked me to come down and do a talk because I knew the coach who had coached in Stony Brook who went there. And then they asked me, the trainers reached out, so the coach wants you to come down and do one talk on sleep and performance for the women's basketball team. I'd love to. And when I was down there, the men's basketball team said, while you're here, do you think you could add another talk? And I said, I'd love to. So we were up to 2. By the end of the day, I had done 5 talks.
I love that.
One after the other. An hour each with a mask because we're still doing the COVID where we all had masks. So I remember it was 5 talks. So I did that. They actually took that information, and sometimes you do these talks and you hope they're not checking off a list. Just, we did the sleep talk, let's move on, that they're actually listening. So I always want the coaches and the staff to be there, not just the players, because the players get it. If you look at any NCAA poll that they take, when they ask them, what do you wish your coaches and administrators talked about? They'll always say, I want more information on sleep and time management. And to me, that goes together.
Yeah, you have to get that buy-in from the top.
Yeah. So George Washington really, they ran with it. And they started asking their players in the morning how they felt, how much sleep they had. And they started actually documenting it. And then they looked at their performance both in games and practices. And they saw the difference. They were able to go back to the players and say, look, when you rate your sleep this way, this is how your performance is. And they got the buy-in. So they really thought it was very useful. I worked with them. They went to Hawaii for ESPN, and we mapped out a whole trip because, a lot of people think I'm going on a trip. Let's plan the night before. And we said, no, you have to do that a week or so before, and you have to be consistent when you can anyhow. But their life, I found out, is hard to be consistent with practices in school, so you can't really change them. And that's what I learned on my end. You have to work within the confines that they have and what they're given. But after that, the George Washington assistant basketball coach went on to the Sunbelt Conference and became one of the commissioners. And they were doing a mental health initiative. So I had teamed up with Dr. Shane Criado, and he actually literally wrote the book, Sleep and Sports Performance, Peak Performance and Sleep. So I started reaching out to him, talked to him earlier. And when this opportunity came up, I like to stay in my lane. I'm an educator. I'm not a doctor. When we start getting into mental health or medications, then I like to bring in the physicians and respect their knowledge and what they bring. So he got involved with me, and we went down there and we set up that whole program and put it online. And I had a couple of things left. Came with simple things to remind people that this is part of your day. So we built these little door cards in the hotel, and we gave them to the players. So that it says, building a champion, do not disturb, just to remind them and get a mindset. And I had T-shirts for our high school team one time that said, I run on sleep, not coffee, or something else. But it was to have them pass each other with that same messaging.
I actually have a door hanger for my business that says do not disturb, and it has my services on the other side, and people don't throw it away because they love using that do not disturb.
The eye mask, simple things like that. You just give them things to remind them, just to put it on the map that this is important. And I always tell them, your training doesn't start when you wake up. It started the night before. It started the week before. It has to be constantly programmed to them that this is important. And everything that you do in the gym is just breaking down. That's catabolic. And you build it back up when you go to sleep. And that, again, getting back to that overuse, I don't think a lot of times it's overuse. I think it's like you said, it's reaction time. It's not giving proper recovery time. And that goes for mental as well as physical.
to that point, in the work that you do, because this is something that, I'm here in Western New York, so we have the Buffalo Bills, we have the Buffalo Sabres, and I would love the opportunity to work with them. But I always talk about when, for instance, the NFL schedule came out last week, right? Looking at when they're traveling across different time zones and really preparing for that. I think a lot of times now, sports teams are starting to engage with sleep coaches, and there's something to be said about the type of coach that they're enlisting, because there's sleep scientists, researchers, psychologists. They all hold different roles in how they can actually help them in that sleep recovery and performance. But when it comes to like the travel schedules, because you said yourself, like it doesn't start the night before. Like even, I took a trip with some friends to Europe pre-COVID, and 2 weeks out, I'm working with them and they're like, this is crazy. And I'm like, but it matters, because when we land in Spain, you want to be able to eat and not feel like you want to go to bed right away. So it's like looking at that preparation in terms of sports teams, like how does that work? Because I know you said you have to work within the constraints of their schedule and their practices and so forth. How are you able to get them to focus on the fact that they have to kind of acclimate themselves to where they're traveling to, because that in itself too will affect their sleep and affect their performance?
It goes through the trainers. You try to go through the trainers and you set up a whole thing, and it involves melatonin, it involves light exposure at the right times. And you don't want them just to arrive there without jet lag, but you want them to arrive there optimized. In the case that I mentioned, we talked about when they should practice, when they should not practice, and getting outside as soon as they get off the plane, different things they could do. But we started them a week or so before and started shifting them a little bit at a time. And I was proud of them. They were 12-point underdogs when they went there. They lost on a buzzer beater, so their legs were there. You can't control the outcome of the game, but if you're down to one shot, it's anybody's game. And then actually, when they came back, they didn't go back to Washington. They went to Chicago, crossed all those time zones again, and they won that game. And the coach actually mentioned in his post-game announcement, he said he was very pleased with how fresh they were and they had done the preparation to get there. So that was kind of a thank you. Like, we did it right. They were successful. They enjoyed it. So it does take a lot of work with the coaches and the trainers. Some of the doctors, as you know, they're still not getting a lot of training in medical school about sleep. So we still have the mentality, unfortunately, of I'll sleep when I'm dead, machismo of you got to get up early, you got to have these workouts. So it's changing the mindset. But a lot of the trainers are younger, and God bless them. I used to think a trainer was a great job, but they have long hours. It's a very hard job. It's not a high-paying job in a lot of places, unless you're at the very top. Young families, and they're moving place to place. So as much as I teach them, I learn. This is a job that at one time I would have loved to have had. Now I'm like, maybe not so much. It's kind of a rough life. You're on the road.
Yeah, I say that all the time. I'm learning something new every single day, right? There's something to be learned in this field. There's ways to evolve your thinking. And in terms of working with the staff and really that foundational piece, because this is where I think people get lost a lot. They don't understand, they don't know what they don't know, right? So even when I do presentations and someone's like, oh, can you do a 20, 30-minute presentation? And it's like, well, I can't even get into the foundation of why sleep is important, what happens while we sleep, to even get into how to improve sleep quality. And then what are the things that you're trying to improve? Are you trying to use it as a learning and development tool? Are you trying to use it for mental health? There's so many different kind of pockets of information that aren't there. What do you find works best in shifting that mindset? Do you come at it from like, before you get into the best practices, helping them understand, is it more that statistical, like showing them those studies that, improve, the free throw rate and all those different things? Or how do you approach that so that it kind of opens up the landscape of their mind if they, initially are like, oh, they're one of those people that are like, oh, I'm good on 6 hours and I still perform, at peak performance, because they kind of have that ingrained in them.
Well, with the coaches, when I speak to the coaches, if they want me to have a talk, I ask them, why are we having this talk? Because I want to know what is their motivation. I don't want it to be to check something off a list and not for them to be there. I like them to be there so that
I feel the
if
same.
you're asking the players to do something, that they get the buy-in and they do it too. And then secondly, what issues are you having? So like you said, if you're only getting a certain amount of time, you can't go over everything. So what are their pain points? So I've done talks where I've actually asked these coaches before, and they're like, well, we're trying to improve our performance. Fine, let's center on performance. Well, we had a lot of injuries, so we want you to talk about injury prevention. So another one might be, this is part of our mental health initiative, like we did. So let's kind of spend more time down that avenue, because you're right. If you only have a half an hour, can't get through so much. Like Stony Brook Women's Soccer, it's great. I go there every year. I'm part of their program now. So I go visit them, and it's kind of funny because last year I went, and that was the fourth year, I believe. And I asked them, how many of you guys have been here for all four? And a couple of people raised hand. I said, why don't you come up and teach it? Because you guys know. But I'll see pictures of them in the newspaper, and they have their eye mask and their answer questions. What's the most important thing you take when you go on the road? And they'll say their pillow with their eye mask, and I'll say, those are my people. You know,
That's
so
amazing.
we've
I love
made
it.
some gains. Yeah, yeah.
My daughter, she's only 10, but she's a super athlete. She sleeps 11 hours a night. She does Taekwondo. She's going to be a black belt in August. She's a soccer player herself.
Right.
And, from the very beginning, I've always instilled in her, like, you can play hard, but you also got to rest, that recovery piece, right? So when you're talking to organizations, do you spend time talking about inflammation in the body and recovery? Or do you kind of just like mention that, if we are not well slept, that can cause inflammation in the body, which can affect recovery? Or do you go a little bit into the science with them about that? Like, how do you approach that when you're speaking with athletes?
A little bit. I mean, we'll have some slides and show them, what are the purposes of sleep. So it is to reduce that inflammation. And again, the catabolic, anabolic, I have slides for both about growth hormone, testosterone, kind of get right to the guys and hit them with the one that everybody loves, which is, these are 20-year-old college athletes. I say, realize that if you're not sleeping sufficiently, your testosterone level is down 15%. So you're playing
older.
like an old 31-year-old, And I'll get their attention because you mentioned the big T word, and explain to them that really, when you're sleeping well, it should be reducing about 1%, but you're doing 15%. So they don't even have to understand the science. You just have to hit them with that information, and all of a sudden they're ready to go take a nap. And that's the other thing. You have to hit them with, because of their schedule, you have to hit them with the importance of naps and how we have to create spaces on the campuses for safe napping. Because a lot of these athletes, they live off campus, and because of their schedule, they don't have the opportunities to get that full night's sleep. They basically 50 hours is what they're doing as far as their sport for the most part. That's what they're allowed, 50 hours. And then they're full-time students. So they have two full-time jobs. They're traveling. They're under a lot of pressure. Now they have these name, image, likeness agreements. So they've got these outside people badgering them about, taking these commitments for these endorsements. One of the best I saw was with Sunbelt. That's why I really appreciate them, because they really went all in. One of the Sunbelt teams, I think it's Troy in Georgia, they actually did a name, image, likeness agreement with a CPAP company. And they took and they got all of the linemen tested for sleep apnea. And then they actually found out, obviously a good number of them came up that they were positive for sleep apnea, and they got them treated. And that was through a name, image, likeness. So to me, that improved their health for their lifetime, and it's a pair of sneakers going to wear out. These people got information, and they got the CPAP units that is going to improve their lifetime forever, not just the 4 or 5 years they're in school.
That's like a new type of influencer, which is what we need,
yes.
Right? Like I had made mention one time about the fact that, the whole world exploded when Biden had his CPAP mask, right? Oh, it was going to be a great opportunity. They're going to talk about the risks of sleep apnea. They're going to go, and no, they spent no time. It kind of was brushed over. But with our athletes, because not only the performance and reaction time and recovery and all of that, they have the opportunity to talk about this. Like my business, The Doze, so the retail that I created, is a lifestyle driven brand where it's really changing the conversation about the way we view and prioritize our sleep. And that starts being at the table, having these open conversations about the importance of it, about how we're a much better version of ourselves. You had made mention to mental health. I know that's a big part of that Sunbelt Sleep to Rise. When we're talking about suicide rates among athletes, it was really alarming, not just during COVID, but over the last couple of years, where you see these individuals who rise through the ranks and they're considered like the best in something. And then they turn around and they take their lives, and people are confused as to, what is going on. But it's a lot of pressure, not only mentally, physically on your body to be an athlete, right? The outside pressures. Sleep makes you resilient. Right? So resiliency is a really big part of that conversation as well. They talk about all these different things that you can do. But again, sleep, the ultimate performance enhancer mentally, physically, emotionally. It's the thing that's going to get us there, right?
That's an important point you mentioned, because when you're talking about mental health, what is easier than to go in a locker room and do an athlete sleep screening? To open the door that something has changed and something is going on. Somebody was sleeping well, and now you go in and you do an athlete sleep screening, and they're telling you in the screening questionnaire and to you that my sleep, it needs help. And I mean, I've seen athletes from the NFL, one of them that I bring up, and I can't think of his name right now, but he said, I just thought this is the way it was. We never had mental health week in school. And he ended up getting diagnosed in the NFL as being bipolar and having sleep issues. Another NHL goalie was drinking a case of beer and taking sleep meds. And when he called, they wanted him to wait a few more days till the season ended. They would deal with him. I mean, so that's not a proper response. He went and got help. Again, he was diagnosed bipolar. But these are people that, even on that top level, they don't know who to go to. They can't, a lot of times, they don't feel comfortable as athletes stating that they're dealing with something. But if you don't go directly and say, there's something going on that way, do you have a sleep issue? Maybe we can get to the bottom by gaining the trust that something changed in their sleep. You probably need to talk to them and see what's going on, see if they'll disclose something. So it gives us a little peephole, a little pass key, maybe to get into other things that are going on.
Absolutely. I think that's where representation matters, right? With the Olympics, even other things like, was it the teen and the Miss USA that just both stepped down because of mental health? I think people are in these spaces and they're saying, I'm experiencing this, so other people must be experiencing this. I mean, it's an important conversation, but it's something that, like you had mentioned, it just hasn't been at the forefront. There's so many different sectors of health, and sleep is interconnected to so many of those pieces. And we're just starting to put together those puzzle pieces, right?
And sometimes we're taking them apart.
Yeah.
My job, your job as educators is to stay up on all that so that we're not just reciting light is terrible at night. It's to say, well, definitely may not help, but it seems to be it's more of the content and the fact that you're pushing past your normal bedtime that may be more of an issue. So some of the folks that go out there, they just have those 10 commandments and they never stay up and change those things. And
yeah, they never expand beyond it. I very much feel the way you do in my role. I'm an educator, and I think as educators, the best thing that we can do is always question everything. When it comes even to my presentations, I say, as it stands today, this is what we know about sleep. If I'm in front of a group, I say, okay, for those of you on the younger side, now this is going to be probably, but if you're on the older side, like sleep architecture changes, like there are different kind of, not necessarily rules, but guidelines depending on the demographic, what your goals are and everything. So it's not definitive. The information can always be interpreted in different ways. And I think that's where, we like to be a little flashy sometimes with the statistics, but that's how you get people's attention, right? They're like, oh, I can improve by 9%. Right, absolutely. Right. I want in on that. But while these are limited studies, they give us kind of a lens into what's the bigger picture. There's something more here that isn't being addressed, right? And we need to go for that shock value in order to get people to kind of sit up and say, you know what, this does matter. That's the thing that's unfortunate is that while the American hustle culture, we still have a lot of that. We're still the most sleep deprived nation, despite research and education in people like you and I going out there. There's not enough of us, right? And that being said, like with someone who is interested in getting into the sleep recovery and performance niche with sleep, because I know you said that you've reached out to trainers and so forth, and I've had people reach out to me as well. And I say, this isn't kind of my scope of expertise. I have worked with, individuals who've run like an Ironman or, athletes, and I talk to them about sleep and recovery, but it's not the area that I focus on. What kind of advice would you give for them to kind of get into this space, places where you see that there may be a white space? Like I know that you work with colleges. I mean, this is very important even on the elementary end, high school students. What kind of advice would you give for them to enter into this space?
So the advice I would give them, I started with the high school. First of all, take time to learn so that you have your information correct, and then go out before you're ready, because you're never going to be ready. So offer yourself to the high school and say, I'd like to come in and do a talk. When I did that talk with that school, I kind of laughed because they were one of the top schools in New York State. So I said, even if they listen, how do I know if they made a difference? Because they're already at the top, you know?
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun. But the reason they're at the top is this. I think I spoke to them back in about, I want to say 2008, 2010. But the reason they're at the top is when I went to that school, here's a high school that was doing meditation yoga and brought me in to talk about sleep as a high school. So it wasn't just that they were bringing in great players. It's that they were open to how do we make these great players? There's great players on other teams. How do we give them a percentage here, a percentage there, so that all those percents will overcome the other guys? And that's what they did. So again, I took my information, went to them first. And after that, I'm not looking at that point to, make a living out of that. I was doing it because I wanted to share the information. I love my job here in the hospital. It offers opportunities to learn clinical so that I know everything is not sleep hygiene. Sometimes there really is a sleep problem there and it has to be addressed, because sometimes a lot of the people that are speaking out there, you'll see it's a lot of sleep hygiene, but they don't consider. I saw one example with a football team where guy was on the bus and his mouth was open and he's sitting up and he's a lineman and he's snoring, and it was posted as a joke. And I was like, that's not a joke. This person has sleep apnea. So they were working with, I know, a sleep science team. So I wrote to the coach, and this was a major college, and said, you're working with these guys, but they're just maybe pushing some kind of device. But you have a clinical situation here that needs to be addressed.
That's one of those misconceptions that we're still trying to overcome, because traditionally in the past, right, when I first got into sleep, it was overweight, middle-aged men that only had sleep apnea. We see it in much younger. We see it in children because of the narrowing of the airway, overbites. Like, there's so much that people think, oh, well, children can't get sleep disorders. That's something that you get when you're old, when you get older, and that's not true. And that's kind of fighting that misinformation so that people understand that not only is it possible, but that there's help available if something is present. And like you said, even with football players, especially with that larger neck circumference and body mass index, like, they're definitely at a higher risk for sleep disorders, especially sleep disordered breathing.
No, in our sleep clinics here, we have 15-20% of our patients are kids, tonsils and adenoids for the most part. And I do talks to schools about start school later because I'm on that national board too as their athletic liaison. But when I talk to the parents, I said it's really important to get them fixed. The kids shouldn't be snoring unless they have a cold maybe, but normally they shouldn't be snoring, and you should get it treated, because my fear is when they go to school, if you don't, and they're jumping around, bouncing off the walls, they get diagnosed as attention deficit, when really they really just need to get their tonsil adenoids out and they'll be happy campers. One of the worst I ever saw as a tech was a kid who was sitting up in bed trying to breathe, hunched over. And I actually wrote a note that morning for our doctors to schedule his surgery, because even as a tech, I couldn't go home in good conscience and sleep without putting a personal plea in that this kid and his mom. I asked the mom, how have you been living with this? She said, I've gone to a bunch of pediatric doctors and they told me that it's normal, don't worry about it. And I said,
they have even less training than primary care. So that's another gap in the market, because such limited training, they say that they'll outgrow it. And, when you're talking about the way that it affects development and kind of like the way that sleep disorders present themselves in children is very different than adults. So that's, again, they're like, oh, well, if they're not snoring really loudly, but it's like, okay, well, if they're bedwetting, if they're waking up and they're facing in the opposite direction, there's all these other additional cues. Like if they're acting out and they're super hyper, they present very differently than what adult would for a sleep disorder. So we can't discredit that. And again, that misdiagnosis and then not recognizing that until you're much older. We're seeing a lot of that in college students with like things like idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy that's gone undiagnosed for so long. That's where they're sleeping. For those who are listening and don't know, this is you're sleeping excessively, and no matter how much sleep you get, you're always tired, even if you're supplementing with a nap. And there is help for that. There is such thing as too much sleep. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't have a sleep disorder because I can sleep for 15 hours. Like I'm a champion sleeper. And it's like, well, that's still a sleep disorder. So, and there's help for that.
Or I don't have a sleep issue. I can fall asleep at the drop of a hat. Well, that's not necessarily good. that may mean that you're sleep deprived or you got a sleep issue. So it's not always a good thing to be able to fall asleep at the drop of a hat.
And I think this is like a call to awareness, because even, I did a parent engagement session a couple of weeks ago, and it's always still so surprising. People don't recognize the correlation between behavior, bullying, mental health and depression, likelihood for trying drugs, alcohol, like all of these things that we worry about as a nation, or we worry about in terms of like the next generation and the things that are happening. If we were to focus again on that sleep component, like not that it alleviates all of that, but it's a big part of all of the things that we're concerned about. So I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing. And I'm really excited to have more people like you in this space, doing this, leading the way.
It's why we knew about each other before we actually knew about each other, because passion comes through. And I could see what you were doing out there. And I said, this is a person I got to keep an eye on. And I think you did the same thing. And that passion comes through, and people don't care about what you know until they know that you care.
Absolutely. Thank you again to Brendan Duffy for sharing his invaluable insights and experiences with us today. His dedication to enhancing athletic performance through sleep better practices is not only fascinating, but also incredibly important. And to our listeners, we hope today's discussion inspires you to consider the essential role sleep plays in achieving peak performance, whether on the field or in your daily life. Remember, the right rest could very well be your secret weapon to success. Thank you again for listening and for joining me today. Until next time, I'm back every Wednesday with a new episode ready to empower you to take control of your sleep. If you've enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to the Dose Podcast. I still have lots to share with you as we work together towards creating solutions around your unique sleep challenges and needs. Until then, remember your pure potential if you change how well you sleep.